He was one of the greatest Jedi who ever lived, a master of the blade, a philosopher, a political mind sharp enough to cut through duress steel. He trained under Yoda himself, the only being in the galaxy most considered wiser. He produced one of the most legendary Jedi of the Clone Wars era. He was by nearly every measure exactly what the Jedi Order was supposed to create. And then he walked away, not in anger, not in a single dramatic moment. He handed his lightsaber and shed his robes and left, calmly, deliberately, like a man who had made a decision he'd been building towards for years. What followed was the Separatist crisis, the Clone Wars, and the deaths of millions. But the question about Haun's story isn't what Dooku became, it's why he left, because the answer is more complicated and more tragic than most people realise. Today we're going to do the full breakdown of why did Count Dooku leave the Jedi Order. To understand why Dooku left, you have to understand who he was before he did. Dooku was born into Sereno nobility, a wealthy aristocratic house with deep roots and deep pride. As an infant, his force sensitivity was identified and he was taken to the Jedi Temple, as was standard. But unlike many Jedi younglings who arrived with nothing and knew nothing else, Dooku always carried the shadow of his heritage, the weight of Sereno, the instinct of a nobleman. He was assigned to Master Yoda as a Padawan, an extraordinary pairing that speaks to how exceptional his potential was judged to be. Under Yoda, Dooku flourished. He became one of the finest lightsaber duelists in the Order's history, eventually mastering Form 2 Makashi, the most elegant, precise, and intellectually demanding of all combat forms. While other Jedi trained for battlefield chaos, Makashi was trained for one thing: defeating other lightsaber users. It required perfect footwork, subtle blade control, and absolute confidence. It suited Dooku completely. He rose to the rank of Jedi Master. He sat on the Jedi Council. He took a Padawan of his own, a young man named Qui-Gon Jinn, and shaped into a Jedi who would himself change the fate of the galaxy. By any external measure, Dooku had everything the Jedi Order could offer, but internally something had been building for decades. Dooku's departure wasn't about personal trauma. It wasn't about loss or grief in the way Anakin's fall was. It was about ideology, and specifically about a growing furious conviction that the Jedi Order had lost its way. He'd watched the Republic decay for years, corruption eating through the Senate like a rust through metal, corporate interests buying votes, entire star systems ground into poverty while politicians debated procedure, the Outer Rim suffering while the core world dined well and called it democracy. And the Jedi. The Jedi served this Republic unquestionably. They sat on advisory councils, carried out Senate mandates, played the role of peacekeepers for a government Dooku increasingly believed was beyond saving. That infuriated him. He believed, genuinely, not a mask for ambition, that the Jedi had become politicians, that in attaching themselves so completely to the Republic, they had compromised their independence and their core purpose. The Jedi were supposed to serve the Force, serve justice. Instead, Dooku watched them serve committees. He said this loudly, repeatedly, to the Council, to fellow Masters, to anyone who would listen. He was not quiet about his disillusionment, and while some Jedi privately agreed with pieces of his critique, the Council as a body was not interested in the kind of radical reform Dooku was advocating for. This is where Qui-Gon Jinn became quietly important. Qui-Gon was Dooku's Padawan, and Qui-Gon grew into a Jedi who also challenged the Council, not politically but philosophically. Qui-Gon followed the living force over the Council's directives. He made independent decisions, he defied expectations. Dooku recognized his own rebellious streak in his former apprentice, and it was one of the few relationships in Dooku's life that seemed to have carried genuine warmth in his heart. When Qui-Gon died on Naboo, cut down by Darth Maul, something in Dooku shifted, not broke, but shifted. The loss of Qui-Gon did not cause his departure from the Order, but it removed one of the last living connections he had that still felt like home. Here is where the story turns darker. Because Dooku did not simply leave the Jedi Order, he was guided out of it. Darth Sidious had been watching Dooku for years. Palpatine was a master of identifying the wounded and the disillusioned. He had done it with Anakin, finding the frightened boy under the Chosen One's confidence. He did it with Dooku differently, because Dooku wasn't frightened. Dooku was angry and righteous and brilliant. Palpatine approached him not with promises of personal power, but with validation. He told Dooku what Dooku already believed, that the Republic was rotten, that the Jedi had fallen and failed, that the galaxy needed something new. He positioned himself not as a manipulator, but as a fellow traveller, someone who saw the same rot and wanted to cut it out. And then he revealed himself as a Sith Lord. This moment, depicted in the novel Dooku, Jedi Lost, and referenced in the Attack of Clones, is pivotal. Because Dooku's reaction was not horror, it was not immediate rejection, it was consideration. A man of absolute principle would have reported Palpatine to the Council immediately. Dooku did not, because Palpatine had read him correctly. Dooku's loyalty was never to the institutions, it was to his own vision of justice, and if a Sith Lord was offering a path towards the galaxy Dooku believed should exist, he was willing to hear it. This is a tragedy at heart of Dooku's fall. He was not weak, he was not broken, he was brilliant enough to convince himself that he could use the dark side as a tool, that he was in control, that Palpatine was a means to an end, that the Confederacy of Independent Systems and the Separatist movement was genuine vehicles for reform. He was wrong, but he never fully accepted that he was wrong, not even at the end. Approximately 10 years before Attack of the Clones, Dooku formally resigned from the Jedi Order. He returned to Serenno, reclaimed his title as a Count. His inherited wealth made him one of the richest men in the galaxy overnight, wealth that would fund the Separatist movements in its early years. He gathered disillusioned systems, legitimate grievances, corporate allies, and idealistic revolutionaries under one banner. On the surface, the Confederacy of Independent Systems looked like exactly what Dooku claimed it was, a political movement pushing back against the corrupt Republic. Underneath, it was Palpatine's hammer, a manufactured crisis designed to justify the creation of a grand army of the Republic, to drag the Jedi into a war that would bleed them dry and give Sidious the emergency powers he needed to dismantle democracy from within. Dooku knew some of this, but he did not know all of it. The layers of Palpatine's manipulation ran deeper than even Dooku's considerable intelligence could fully map. He trained under Sidious, took the Sith name Tyrannus, and orchestrated the assassination of attempts on Padme Amidala, commissioned the clone army on Kamino through the identity of Tyrannus, the same army that would eventually turn on the Jedi Order at Order 66. Every piece of Palpatine's plan ran through Dooku's hands, and when he was no longer needed, when Anakin Skywalker knelt over a defeated Dooku on the Invisible Hand, and Palpatine gave the order, "Do it," Dooku died with what may have been his first genuine moment of clarity in a long time. He had been a tool the whole time. This is a question worth sitting on. Dooku was not innocent, he ordered deaths, he enabled a war that killed millions, he served a monster while telling himself he was serving a cause. But he was also a man who was right about the Republic's corruption, right about the Jedi's political compromises, right that the galaxy needed fundamental changes. He had the correct diagnosis and catastrophically wrong medication. This is what made him one of the Star Wars most compelling figures. Not a cackling villain, not a broken boy like Anakin, a wise, proud, principled man who convinced himself that wisdom and pride and principle were enough to keep him safe from the dark side. They were not. The greatest Jedi Order produced out of its founding generation walked away, not because he stopped believing in justice, but because he stopped believing the Jedi were capable of delivering it. And in that gap between faith and disillusionment, Palpatine built the Empire. Dooku's story is a warning about certainty, about the danger of being so convinced you are right that you stop questioning who is guiding you towards being right. You want us to go deeper? We can cover Dooku's full dual history, his relationship with Qui-Gon, or how Tyrannus fits into Palpatine's grand plan. Leave it in the comments. If you liked the video, please subscribe. Really appreciate it. Maybe drop a like if you can. And then always, may the Force be with you.